Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is the Living Life Between Two Worlds channel, and this channel is a godly ministry channel about transgenderism, and I'm your host, Mike Joels. And on this channel, I'll be presenting various videos about different aspects of transgenderism. In this video, I'll be discussing transgenderism and its relationship with spiritual warfare. Well, if you've watched my personal testimony video, you'll remember that I told you that God has an opinion about alternate sexual lifestyles, and in particular transgenderism. And in that video, I told you about my struggle with transgenderism for almost 35 years. And during those years, I reached the point where I hated my life and I was ready to change my sex. That is, until God came to me in a divine experience. He showed me his truth about transgenderism and set me free from the problem that I was powerless against. In that experience, he revealed that transgenderism is more than just a physical problem. Rather, it is a spiritual matter, and spiritual warfare is connected to it. In fact, God revealed that spiritual warfare is connected to all alternate sexual lifestyles. God also showed me that he is against these alternate sexualities that go against what he created, and that he will judge these lifestyles in the end. This was an amazing divine deliverance experience that brought me from bondage and death to freedom and peace. Well, because of God's revelation, I'm making this video to talk about this connection between spiritual warfare and transgenderism and the other alternate sexual lifestyles. I want to show how the spiritual activity affects our world and how it affects you too. I should also say that while I believe this warfare is connected to all alternate sexual lifestyles, I will primarily focus on its role in influencing transgenderism. But before I begin my presentation, I want to tell you that God told me to write a book that tells my story and talks about the topic of transgenderism. He also wanted me to go speak at church about this. So if after watching this video you have questions and would like to read more, or perhaps you'd like to contact me, I'm putting my book and contact information at the end of this video. So with my introduction finished, let's start the discussion about spiritual warfare as it applies to transgenderism. Well, in response to my opening remarks that spiritual warfare is connected to transgenderism, you might reply, well, why should I care? And why should I watch this video? Even if spiritual warfare exists and even if it is connected to transgenderism, why does that matter to me? Can't I just accept that some people will choose transgenderism and then live and let live and peacefully coexist with them? Well, I believe the answer to this question is no. And here are just a few reasons why I believe you should be concerned about transgenderism and spiritual warfare. So first, as I stated in my personal testimony video, transgenderism is a lie. God told me that directly. It can't truly change sex, and it cannot, and I emphasize the word cannot, deliver what it promises. So you should at least understand this truth at the very least. Second of all, transgenderism is destructive. It can tear families apart. It can and does destroy marriages. It can destroy a person's life and place them in a state of despair. And those who medically transition can realize one day that they've made a big mistake and they will be forced to live with regret. And some people can't live with this regret and they end their life with suicide. So it should be easy to see that if transgenderism touches someone in your family, you could be affected by their decision. But you should also know that the outcomes of spiritual warfare and transgenderism go beyond simply personal impact. The activism groups in the world that support transgenderism and the other alternate lifestyles have moved beyond simply wanting tolerance and peaceful coexistence. Rather, they work to reshape the laws and morality of our world so that these sexualities are normalized and forced upon us. And this activity will affect many aspects of our lives, including bathroom policy, the laws that govern us, what we can freely say in public, and perhaps how our tax dollars are spent, just to name a few things. So seeing that transgenderism and the alternate lifestyles can affect us, I believe we should try to understand them. We should also understand the connection to spiritual warfare and its impact upon us. And finally, we should determine what we can do about it. So then let's begin our exploration by first discussing what spiritual warfare is and who is behind it. So broadly speaking, spiritual warfare is a force that works in our world to mislead, persuade, and influence people and societies so that they accept and follow behaviors that God has told us that he's against. And this is accomplished by repeatedly telling people that these behaviors are acceptable. Basically, these are lies. You'll recall that I told you that God is against transgenderism, yet our societies repeatedly promote it and tell us that it is acceptable. And if we know what God says, then these conflicting messages should give us a clue that spiritual warfare is connected with transgenderism. So why does spiritual warfare happen? And who's behind this activity? Well, let's talk about that next. And this activity exists because of one being. His name is Satan. And the Bible tells us that Satan, who is an angel created by God, decided that he was better than God and that he wanted to overthrow God. However, God defeated Satan. And because of this rebellion, God condemned Satan to an everlasting punishment called hell. Well, this punishment will not be completed until the end of the world and at some future date. But until then, Satan wants revenge on God. And unfortunately, his revenge includes us. So Satan uses spiritual warfare to deceive people so that they follow what he says rather than what God says. And when people do that, they sin and sin against God. And in many cases, they destroy their lives. And we should remember that Satan and destruction go hand in hand together. So this is the concept of spiritual warfare. It's a matter of revenge and a battle between Satan and God, or good and evil. And unfortunately, we are the pawns that are caught in the middle of that game. And we can confirm that this activity comes from Satan by looking in the Bible. In John chapter 8:44 in the New Testament, Jesus tells us that Satan is the father of lies, and he is responsible for them. The Bible also tells us about the activity of Satan in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8 in the New Testament. And 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8 says, "Be alert and be of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour." Well, if we connect these verses, we see that Satan is responsible for lies and that he spreads his misinformation in the world. And this is done with the help of his demons and those who live in the world who follow him. And as it says in 1 Peter 5:8, Satan does this with the intent of devouring people. We can substitute the word destroy for the word devour, because when people follow what Satan says, their lives can end in destruction. You'll recall earlier that I related some of the destructive outcomes from transgenderism, and destroyed families, destroyed marriages, destroyed personal lives. If destruction follows transgenderism, and if Satan is tied to destruction, as the scriptures tell us, this should cause us to question whether Satan and spiritual warfare are connected with transgenderism. Something else that can give us a hint about this connection are the messages that we hear from society about transgenderism. So here are just a few messages that you might hear. You're so brave. You should affirm who you are inside. You should be happy in your own skin. Well, clearly the messages from God and the messages from society conflict. They can't both be right. One of the sources must be lying to us. And these affirming messages tell us transgenderism is okay. Yet as we have seen, the outcomes are destructive. So this should tell us there's a good chance that we are dealing with something that involves spiritual warfare and destruction. Well, what I've said should help us to see the nature of spiritual warfare, mislead the people so that they don't follow God, and place their lives in destruction. The concept is straightforward enough so that we can understand what it is and who's behind it. And all that remains to be said is that if transgenderism is linked to spiritual warfare and its outcomes are destructive, as I've said, it's probably something that we should avoid. So now that we understand what spiritual warfare is and the possible connection with transgenderism, now let's move on and discuss how spiritual warfare is waged. And I believe there are two basic methods. So the first method of waging spiritual warfare is at the personal level, through temptation by demonic attack. And with respect to transgenderism, this warfare is waged against the person who has already reached a breaking point where they hate their life, where they are questioning their identity, and where they could be open to following an alternate sexual lifestyle. In my own personal testimony, I said that I reached my breaking point because of the abuses that I received and because I perceived that the opposite sex was more desirable. Someone else could have a different set of negative experiences that caused them to reach their breaking point. But however that happens, it's at this breaking point where I believe spiritual warfare can take place. So given the discontent that exists in the person's mind, Satan sees an opportunity to destroy the person's life. And then demonic attack begins, where sinful suggestions and thoughts or temptations are injected into the person's mind. And these temptations try to intensify the discontent in the mind and try to get the person to dwell on the sinful problem that they're dealing with. And this is done repetitively and relentlessly to overpower the person's mind so that they eventually submit to what they're dealing with. Well, you should therefore understand that the decision to follow transgenderism or another alternate lifestyle is not made exclusively by the person. It may start with the person's discontent with their life, but spiritual warfare can intervene and try to push them over the edge so that the person puts action to their thoughts and eventually destroys their life. And because of my experience with transgenderism, I believe I can speak to this idea of spiritual attack. So when I reached my breaking point and was trapped in the transgender mind and I had my identity issue, I can recall experiencing quote-unquote thoughts in the mind. These relentless thoughts would sometimes appear in my mind from out of nowhere, even if I wasn't thinking about the conflict at that moment. I believe these thoughts were spiritual temptation and thought injection, and they stirred the conflict repeatedly and intensified the thoughts that were already burning in my mind. And over time and with much repetition, I began to believe that transgenderism was just part of my makeup. It wasn't until God confronted me in my divine experience that the nagging thoughts stopped. And since God was the only one, and I repeat, he was the only one who had the power to stop these thoughts, then this led me to understand that these thoughts were not part of my innate being, but rather I had been under spiritual attack. So that's why I believe one method of spiritual warfare is through personal temptation and thought injection, and why I believe spiritual warfare is connected to transgenderism. I lived with this until God took care of the problem. Well, that I believe is the first method of waging spiritual warfare. Now let's move to the second method. And that second method has a much larger scope than the first method. Rather than focusing on individuals, it's waged against societies. Its purpose is to create a satanic world where Satan's moralities and philosophies are adopted. And this warfare is carried out by people who live in our world that follow Satan. They are Satanists. They voice Satan's philosophies repetitively in society so that people eventually believe, accept, and follow them. And some of them work, I believe, in high places of leadership and power so that the laws and policies which align with Satan's values are adopted. So you should know that transgenderism and the LGBTQ lifestyles are satanic, and that incorporating these ideologies into the rules and morality of societies are included in this work. And I will show this shortly in more detail. Well, I believe that transgenderism and the alternate lifestyles have existed for many decades, perhaps even centuries. But based on my research, I believe this effort to transform society with respect to transgenderism and alternate lifestyles did not move into full swing until somewhere in the late 1980s, perhaps the early 1990s, at least in the United States. It was then that we began to see policies and legislation that tried to normalize these lifestyles. Workplace policies were established that said that discrimination against LGBTQ people was unacceptable. And after that, into the 2000s, the transgender explosion started emerging in the media, in sports, in the workplace, and beyond. And most recently, we've seen the Equality Act, which promotes total acceptance of transgenderism. It also tries to trample free speech and muzzle anybody who says anything against these practices. Well, obviously, nothing happens by chance. And for this shift in morality to occur over the past 30 plus years, some force had to be behind it. I believe this force was the activity from the LGBTQ organizations. And behind them, I believe, is the work of this second attack method of spiritual warfare, which is led by Satanists with the purpose of changing our world. So then to recap, I believe that the goal of spiritual warfare with respect to transgenderism and alternate sexual lifestyles is to mislead the people and societies so that they believe and follow what God is against. And as I said, this is carried out by two methods. First, personal spiritual attack against individuals, and second, attacking and changing society's norms and morality through political action. Either method has the same goal, namely destruction. Okay, but in response to what I've just said, you may say, well, that's your opinion. How do we really know that spiritual warfare is connected to transgenderism and the alternate lifestyles? And how do we know that Satan and Satanists, satanic forces, use this warfare to drive the activity we see happening today? So to show this connection, I believe that we need to show three things. And first of all, we must show that Satanists have beliefs that include alternate sexual lifestyles, and that these philosophies are connected to Satan. Second of all, I believe we need to see that Satanists plan to put their beliefs into action by promoting alternate sexual lifestyles in the world. And third, we should determine if the activities that we see happening in our world are consistent with the beliefs and stated goals of Satanists and Satan. So if we can show that all three of these things are true and connected, then we should be able to reasonably conclude that satanic activity is responsible for driving the transgender and alternate sexuality activity that we see in our world today. So let's begin our investigation by starting with what Satanists believe. Well, if you've searched the internet, you'll find that Satanists believe in being able to indulge in whatever you want to do. Indulgence is a key tenet in their belief system. And for them, nothing is right or wrong. If something is right in your mind, you should be able to indulge in it, provided you take responsibility for your choice and your actions. And implied in that tenet is that no God should be able to tell you that you can't do something if you think it's right for you. Second of all, they believe in sexual freedom of choices in all bodily forms and expressions. And in other words, there are no limits, and all sexualities are valid if they're right for the person. So connecting these two beliefs, we see that Satanists do not embrace a morality where male and female are the only two valid sexes. Rather, you can choose any, capitalize the word any, sexual lifestyle you want, or that the mind can conceive of. So these are the tenets and the beliefs of Satanists as they pertain to sexuality. So now we need to connect these beliefs to Satan so that we can see that this is all coming from him. And we'll do that by first connecting what Satanists believe with the God that they worship. And his name is Baphomet. And if we can show that Baphomet represents these same beliefs, then we're halfway to showing that the beliefs of Satanists come from Satan, and therefore that Satan is at the root of the activity that we see happening. So I want to examine Baphomet now and connect him to Satan, connect him to the Satanists. And so here is a picture of Baphomet so you can see what he looks like. And as you can see, you'll notice that Baphomet has the head of a goat and the body of a human. And you'll notice that there is a flame on top of the goat's head, and that the body has the sex organs of both sexes, the breasts of a female and the symbolic male organ. And there are words written on the arms of the body. They are the word solve, S-O-L-V-E, written on the right arm, which points upward, and coagula, or C-O-A-G-U-L-A, written on the left arm, which points down. So I'm telling you these words in case you can't read them on the video. So let's start with the flame. The flame on top of the head of the deity indicates control by Satan. And the meaning is that anybody who takes Baphomet as their god is controlled by Satan. Then we have the goat's head, which indicates carnal indulgence, and that the person following Baphomet can indulge in whatever's right in their eyes. So together, the goat's head and the flame mean that the person who believes in carnal indulgence and takes Baphomet as their deity is controlled by Satan. Moving on, let's talk about the body, which is the body of a human. However, unlike normal human bodies where only one sex would be present, the Baphomet deity merges the two sexes. And this blurs the hard line that separates the two sexes and implies that the follower of Baphomet can be male, female, both, or any form that they desire. Thus, any sexuality is possible through the Baphomet deity. And you should see that this agrees with what I said earlier, which is that Satanists believe a person can indulge in any sexuality that they want. And finally, let's talk about the words solve and coagula that appear on the arms of Baphomet. And these are Greek words which stand for the concept that something can be broken down from its original form, then reconstructed in a new form. And referring to Baphomet and choice of sexuality, it means that the person chooses their sexuality, or rather their solve, which is the solution that's right for them. And next, the body is broken down, rebuilt, and transformed, or rather coagula. And this is exactly what a transgender person does. They determine that being the opposite sex is right for them. This is their solve. Then they determine how to do that, and they proceed to take hormones and have surgery, thus changing their bodily form. This is their transformation, or their coagula. This is the act of implementing the solution and transforming the body to its new form. So given the description of Baphomet, we can see that Baphomet represents the idea that the person can be whatever sexuality they choose. Thus, Baphomet is a transgender deity. This discussion should show us that Baphomet and Satanists are in agreement, and therefore they are connected. Okay, well, with that connection between Satanist and Baphomet established, let's complete the connection between Satanists and Satan by showing that Baphomet is connected to Satan. So if we can do that, then we can say that the beliefs of Satanists, which motivate their actions, come from Satan. So to connect Satan and Baphomet, all you need to know is that Baphomet is simply an alternate name of Satan. In fact, Baphomet is one of the 72 alternate names of Satan, or rather infernal names, as Satanists refer to them. And since Baphomet is an alternate name of Satan, we should know that when we're talking about Baphomet, we're also talking about Satan. And so if Baphomet is equal to Satan, then whatever beliefs are represented by Baphomet should also be true for Satan. And so this should complete the connection. From this analysis, we should realize the following things. First of all, Baphomet is a deity that embodies choice of alternate sexualities, including transgenderism. Second, the philosophies of Baphomet and Satanists are in agreement. Therefore, they're connected. And finally, Baphomet is equal with and therefore connected to Satan. So since these things are all connected, we can say that Satanists do not believe these philosophies alone. Rather, Satan is at the root of the alternate sexual lifestyles. Therefore, we can say that transgenderism and other alternate sexualities are satanic principles and practices. Okay, well, after thinking about that for a minute or two, this knowledge should reveal one additional subtle point, and that is that a person who does not consider themselves to be a Satanist, but rather which embraces one of these alternate sexual lifestyles, is following a satanic principle. and practice, whether they know it or not. This should give such a person something to seriously consider if they understand this. Well, in case you'd like to research Satanism yourself and prove what I've been talking about, you can find more information at the Brotherhood of Satan's website. And this site's a bit gruesome, so be warned if you decide to go there. To get to the website, you can search for one of the following search text strings that I'm displaying on the video. Note the use of quotes surrounding the search text when you do the search. Okay, well, now that I have shown the connection between Satan and Satanists with respect to alternate sexualities, we should see that Satanists do not believe these things by themselves. We should see that transgenderism and alternate sexualities are tied to Satan. So, with that understanding, let's now investigate the involvement of Satanists in our world by hearing what they're saying and looking at some of the things that they plan to do. So to do this, I want to present 3 video clips that were captured from YouTube videos where Satanists tell us their plans. So let's watch these clips and see if we can gain additional understanding of the intentions of those that follow Satan by what they say they plan to do. So the first video clip is from an interview conducted by Bob Larson around the year 1988 with 2 Satanists, Zena LaVey and Nicholas Schreck. And I'm going to try and put the complete interview on my Living Life Between Two Worlds channel. You'll find it by searching for Bob Larson interview with Satanists. In this clip presented here, we'll hear Mr. Schreck tell us what Satanists plan to do to change our world into a satanic arena. This is a small clip from the larger video. So here is the clip of Mr. Schreck.
We feel that the best way to change the world into a satanic arena is by having strong individuals in different areas do their own individual work.
Okay, well, that was Mr. Schreck speaking, and you'll recall that I said earlier that Satanists plan to change our world by placing people who align with their beliefs in positions of power so that changes can be made. And in this video clip, Mr. Schreck basically confirms this is exactly what they plan to do. Okay, so now let's move on from the first video to the second and third clips. And these next 2 video clips were captured from a video that was recorded and published on YouTube in 2015. And that video showed the first state-sanctioned meeting of the Satanic Temple on the Capitol steps in Lansing, Michigan. And this happened some 25 years after the Bob Larson interview. Unfortunately, the complete video has been taken down and is unavailable for public viewing. So all I can show you are the captured clips from the larger video. So let's listen to these clips to gain insight into what these Satanists say they plan to do. So here's the first clip.
Hail, comrades! Hail, sisters and brothers, and hail Satan! We are gathered here to celebrate the spirit of humanity and the dawn of a new American era. In a season when many commemorate the birth of Christ, we commemorate our own Genesis, the enlightenment of all humanity, a revelation of our nature as written in the annals of history, a gift from Lucifer, the light bringer, the morning star, and the rebel. We are Satanists. We engender moral, spiritual, and sexual freedom, personal independence, and insist upon personal choice in all things. We care for the significance of the individual spirit and personal moral responsibility.
Okay, that was the first of the 2 video clips. Now let's listen to the second one.
Solemnly and with great sincerity thank Satanic America has heard your call to action. If religion is to lead in areas which have traditionally been left to a secular democracy, we will do our duty too, to bring the insights of our satanic practice to the State House, to the courthouse, to schools, and of course, homes and businesses of America.
Okay, so what did we hear from these last two clips about the intentions of Satanists? Well, first we heard their agenda, which is to bring about a new America. I believe what they're really saying is that they plan to bring about a new morality in America. Implied in that is what they intend to do with the existing morality. And I believe that if they plan to bring about a new morality, then they're going to have to sweep away the old current morality. And second, they told us how they plan to do this, and that is by bringing satanic practices to the state house, the courthouse, and homes and businesses of America. And mentioning the state house and the courthouse is interesting because it should tell us that political action will be part of their process. Thus, the goal is to change America, and by extension the world, so that it accepts satanic practices and morality. And since transgenderism and alternate sexual philosophies are satanic, this work will include normalizing those sexualities. And the leader confirms this by saying that Satanists believe in sexual freedom. So this should be another clue that spiritual warfare and transgenderism are connected. And finally, we should see that the goal of creating a satanic world hasn't changed from the first video clip from 1988 to these latest two clips from 2015, which were some 25 years apart. So this should tell us that creating a satanic world is a consistent goal of Satanists. Well, having examined Satanist belief and hearing their plans, I want to focus now on what we see happening in our world today. And we should try to determine any similarities between what we have learned about satanic philosophy and what we see happening today. So here are some examples of what we see happening. First of all is the Equality Act. It was passed in the U.S. Congress a year or two ago. It normalizes and protects alternate lifestyles. It also tries to muzzle opinions and free speech that would disagree with pro-transgender or pro-LGBTQ policies. The other thing we see is drag queen story time in libraries. So here are drag queens that come into libraries and read stories to children. The danger, I believe, is that this opens the mind of the children to alternate sexual lifestyles. Something else we've seen is schools allowing children to identify as the opposite sex with no parental notification. I believe this promotes transgenderism and usurps the rights of parents. Something else that we've seen is transgenderism in sports. And here, transgender women, or rather biological men, who are transitioning to female, compete in female sports. And what we've seen is that the transgendered women have an unfair biological advantage that the genetic female athletes can't compete against. It's basically not fair. And this is canceling the victories that women have won since Title IX was passed some 50 years ago. Something else we see is media programming that supports and promotes acceptance of alternate lifestyles. So these are just a few examples. Well, what we should realize is that this is a major indoctrination campaign designed to normalize alternate sexualities in all areas of our society and to change the morality about sex that we believe. And since we have seen that these alternate sexualities are satanic, then we should realize that our world is being transformed and it's under attack so that it accepts satanic practices. We should remember that this is exactly what the Satanists said they planned to do. Therefore, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that our world is being changed so that it accepts satanic principles and values. Also, the morality that was once the standard is being challenged and changed in favor of these new principles. So if this is true, we could then ask, well, how far has this indoctrination gone? And based on the examples given, we should see that this campaign has infiltrated many different aspects of society. But I believe this infiltration has even reached the top levels of government, and that there are power brokers at the top that are driving changes that favor transgenderism and alternate sexualities. And these changes will ultimately change the laws that govern average citizens. And to confirm this, I want to show a video of President Joe Biden advocating for transgender acceptance. And this video was made on May 31st of 2022, which was named the Transgender Day of Visibility. And as you watch the video, you should compare the president's message of accepting transgenderism in all areas of our society to the message that we've heard in the video clips of the Satanists, and then determine if you think the messages are similar or the same.
To everyone celebrating Transgender Day of Visibility, I want you to know that your president sees you. Jill, Kamala, Doug, our entire administration sees you for who you are, made in the image of God and deserving of dignity, respect, and support. But we know it's hard when there are those out there who don't see you and don't respect you. For example, the onslaught of anti-transgender state laws attacking you and your families is simply wrong. This administration is standing up for you against all these hateful bills, and we're committed to advancing transgender equality in the classroom, on the playing field, at work, in our military, in our housing and healthcare systems, everywhere, simply everywhere. Today, we're announcing even more steps, but there's always more work to do to end the epidemic of violence against transgender women of color and girls of color, to ensure transgender seniors can age with dignity, and to finally pass a bipartisan Equality Act, to help transgender persons around the world live free from discrimination and violence. Above all, to be there with you. To parents of transgender children, affirming your child's identity is one of the most powerful things you can do to keep them safe and healthy. To any transgender American who's struggling, please know that you're not alone. To parents and children alike, please ask for help and know this: you're so brave, you belong, and we have your back. God bless you all. Be brave.
Okay, well, with this last video, I've completed my arguments, and I've attempted to show that spiritual warfare is involved in transgenderism and alternate sexual lifestyles, and that these lifestyles are satanic. I've also tried to show that we are in a war that is working to promote these lifestyles and change the morality of our world. I believe what we see today is a society that is quickly abandoning the standard of male and female that God created, one that has existed for the past 5,000 plus years. Today, society's doctrines advocate for ideas consistent with Satan and Baphomet. And because of what we see today, I believe we can say that Satan and his workers have been hard at work. They are accomplishing exactly what they said that they're going to do, and we are in a spiritual war that affects the rules and the morality that will rule us. So at this point, with everything that I've presented, you may be ready to throw in the towel and give up. It shouldn't be too difficult to see the potential impact this activity can have and how it can affect people. And we should see how policies and laws can affect the rules and morality that we're forced to live under. However, despite everything that's going on and everything that I've told you about, I believe there's hope. And I believe there are things that we can do to combat what I've shown you. And so I'd like to talk about those things. Well, first of all, I think political action is needed to fight the policies that are being put in place or are already in place. And for those who are concerned about what is happening and are politically minded, they should be encouraged to get involved in the political process. I won't say this is going to be easy, but I think it's necessary. Second of all, beyond political action, we should know that we can personally impact our world. I believe this can be done by being informed about transgenderism and alternate sexual lifestyles, then building relationships with transgendered or LGBTQ people that we meet, and then sharing the truth with them, of course, in love. We should remember that God's truth is what can transform a person's mind who is trapped and then bring them from death unto life. My life is a good example of this happening. Churches should also use this action plan to welcome and reach those that are trapped. They should remember that this can't happen if the doors are closed to the LGBTQ. So churches should also realize that welcoming an LGBTQ person does not mean condoning the lifestyle. So then the goal of reaching out to fulfill God's work is the goal. You may remember that I said that God wanted this group reached, and by doing these things, we can play a part in God's transformative work. Finally, I believe parents can play a key role in protecting their children. And as we've seen, there are many influences that can impact a child's sense of what is right, including their idea of sexuality. I believe the goal of parents is to help their children grow up and live a normal sexual life. Parents should talk to their kids about sex and additionally make them aware of the truth about these alternate sexualities at the appropriate time, and also the danger that they present. And by doing this, parents can prepare their children for what they are going to experience and meet in the world. Parents can also take a role in monitoring what their children are exposed to at school and in extracurricular activities. And by being engaged, they can identify pro-LGBTQ policies and decide if they need to act in response to them. So that completes my presentation, and since you've reached the end, I hope you will consider what I've presented and answer for yourself whether you think that satanic activity and spiritual warfare are connected to transgenderism and the alternate sexual lifestyles and the activity that we see in our world. I hope you can see that what I'm saying is not just my opinion. You should decide for yourself what you think and how you will respond. I hope you'll also remember that if you're personally suffering from transgenderism or you know someone who is, that God can bring such a person out of the bondage to being free and at peace with themselves and with Him. That is exactly what God did for me. And if you do know someone who is suffering with transgenderism, I hope you'll tell them about this video or get them a copy of my book so they can hear the truth and hopefully find God, peace, and escape. And speaking about my book and contact information, here's the information that I promised you at the start of this video. So about my book that God told me to write, here's some information. The name of my book is Living Life Between Two Worlds. It recounts my struggle with transgenderism and tells how God brought me out of it. And chapter 5 is where you're going to find information about transsexuality and spiritual warfare. You can find my book on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and in the iTunes store. And there are print copies available as well as electronic versions for the Nook and the Kindle. And you can find my book by searching for my name, Mike Joels, or the book title, Living Life Between Two Worlds, as shown here. And make sure that you surround the search text with quotes as shown. After that, if you'd like to contact me with questions, or perhaps you'd like for me to come speak at your organization or church, here's my contact information. And finally, you can find other videos I make available about transgenderism by searching for my name, Mike Joels, or the text Transgender Deliverance as shown here. And once again, remember to surround either search text with quotes as shown. You can also look on my YouTube channel, which is Living Life Between Two Worlds, as shown here. And so with all of that said, I'll close by saying thank you for watching this video. And finally, as I always say, never forget that God loves you.